It's 2 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon, which means this is time for another episode of Coup Save America. Welcome, friends. In the complex landscape of American politics, few realities are as entrenched and simultaneously as overlooked as the deep-rooted corruption and corporate domination of the two major political parties. I'm talking, of course, about the Democrats and the Republicans. Despite all the differences, and I recognize there are many, these parties flaunt. The substratum of their policy agendas reveals a unifying factor: the overwhelming influence of corporate interest. This issue, while masked in partisan bickering and performative opposition, runs to the core of why real change often remains all but elusive. And this is precisely why a legitimate third-party movement is not just desirable, it is essential. Let's begin with a harsh truth. The two-party system in America is effectively a corporate cartel. The major political parties operate like rival corporate wings, fiercely competing for market share while maintaining the same overarching strategy of serving elite interests. Corporate America plays both sides, ensuring that whether a red or blue wave sweeps into power, the policies that uphold the corporate hegemony stay intact. In 2020, more than $14 billion was spent on the election cycle, with nearly half coming from dark money sources, corporations and political action committees, better known as PACs. This level of spending is unprecedented in U.S. history, signifying the increasing price tag of influence. With corporations showering both parties with funds, expecting them to prioritize the needs of the average citizen over their financial benefactors is naive at best and complicit at worst. One might ask, what about the Democrats? Aren't they supposed to be the party of working class Americans, of civil rights and social progress? This perception, nurtured by decades of strategic messaging, is severely flawed. The Democratic Party, particularly since Bill Clinton's presidency, has embraced neoliberalism with arms wide open. Policies such as the North America Free Trade Agreement, often known as NAFTA, the repeal of Glass-Steagall, and welfare reform epitomize how the party has drifted towards an agenda that prioritizes deregulation and privatization at the expense of working class communities. Barack Obama's administration, which of course came in with the promises of hope and change, continued this trend with its Wall Street-friendly bailout policies and an anemic response to the housing crisis. By refusing to hold banking executives accountable and allowing big banks to gobble up the competition post-2008, the Obama administration paved the way for growing economic inequality and widespread disillusionment with the Democratic Party. Meanwhile, the Biden administration has done little to challenge the pervasive influence of corporate lobbyists. In his first 100 days in office, President Biden received praise for temporarily halting fossil fuel drilling on federal lands and rejoining the Paris Climate Accord. But in subsequent months, his administration has quietly approved new oil and gas leases and greenlight the Willow Project in Alaska, which will have devastating environmental repercussions for centuries to come. Here, the juxtaposition of progressive rhetoric and regressive policy choices reveals the Democrats' complicity in serving the interest of corporate America. And again, they're not alone. On the Republican side, the picture is equally, if not more, dismal. The party has increasingly embraced an authoritarian brand of right-wing politics that thrives on a toxic mix of white nationalism, religious fundamentalism, and unfettered corporatism. The Trump era, marked by the dismantling of regulatory safeguards and a historic tax cut for the rich that overwhelmingly benefited corporations and the wealthy, exemplifies the party's allegiance to corporate America. Despite rallying against the deep state and corporate elites, Trump's actions in office, such as, rolling back Dodd-Frank provisions, gutting environmental regulations, stocking his cabinet with Goldman Sachs alumni, betrayed any semblance of anti-establishment populism. The Republican Party's descent into anti-democratic demagoguery, coupled with its longstanding commitment to serving corporate overlords, has made it abundantly clear that they have no interest in fostering a genuinely democratic society. Instead, they perpetuate a plutocracy that continues to widen the gap between the ultra-wealthy and the rest of society. And friends, we all suffer as a result. A major reason for the entrenchment of corporate influence within the two-party system is a revolving door between corporate lobbyists and political appointees. A 2019 study found that nearly 59% of the top lobbyists in Washington had previously served in government. The fusion between the political and corporate spheres means that the boundaries between serving the public and serving private interests are often simply non-existent. Moreover, both parties frequently make use of super PACs to circumvent campaign finance laws and flood elections with corporate cash. During the 2022 midterm elections, super PACs supporting both Democratic and Republican candidates raised an astonishing $3.6 billion combined. In a system that prizes big money over grassroots democracy, politicians are effectively purchased and subsequently beholden to their benefactors. With both of America's major parties functioning more like corporations than like a government, a viable third-party option is imperative. It's not a luxury, it's imperative. For those that argue that third-party politics are a pipe dream, a quick look at history shows that major political transformations often required the courage to challenge entrenched power structures. The rise of the Republican Party in the 1850s, which emerged out of the abolitionist movement in opposition to the Whig Party's appeasement of the slaveholding South, offers a powerful and nostalgic precedent. In the 19th century, America saw a radical restructuring of its political landscape when people dared to push for alternatives. Now, we see a similar paradigm shift to disrupt the corporate duopoly. I would even argue it's an oligarchy. Let's look at some statistics that highlight the urgency of our situation. In 2023, Gallup found that a record 63% of Americans believed that a third major party was needed to effectively represent the people's interest. This figure highlights the growing public discontent with the existing two-party system. Moreover, a Pew Research Center report from 2021 indicated that 67% of American voters believe the government primarily serves the interest of a few big interests rather than the average citizen. These numbers indicate that a clear majority of the population is at least paying some small level of attention to the biggest problem within our political system. The opportunity for third-party emergence lies in capitalizing on this discontent. The Green Party, the Libertarian Party, and other emergent movements have already laid the groundwork. However, systemic barriers such as restrictive ballot access laws, exclusion from major debates, and of course the media's bias towards a binary political narrative severely limit their potential. Reforming these structural impediments should be a central priority for those advocating for a more pluralistic political landscape. Now, detractors often claim that voting for a third party is tantamount to wasting your vote or inadvertently supporting the opposition. For instance, if you happen to support the Green Party, well, you're by very fact supporting Donald Trump. So the logic goes. But this logic perpetuates a cycle of coercion, forcing voters to choose the lesser of two evils, which in reality are merely different manifestations of the same corrupt corporate entities. Furthermore, the existence of ranked-choice voting systems, as recently implemented in Maine and Alaska, proves that third-party voting can be a viable possibility without causing the dreaded, quote-unquote, spoiler effect. The abject corruption of the two-party system cannot be remedied from within. One cannot fix a system that is fundamentally designed to perpetuate itself. A third-party movement, independent from corporate influence and unencumbered by the entrenched machinery of the Democratic and Republican establishments, represents really the only viable path forward at this point. The stakes are too high to remain complacent. From environmental collapse to escalating income inequality and a broken healthcare system, the crises we face are existential. And they cannot be resolved by two parties that profit from maintaining the status quo. We must dare to imagine a different future. We must dare to break free from the corporate duopoly that has a stranglehold on American democracy. The struggle for third-party viability is not merely a political strategy. It is a moral imperative. History has shown that change happens when ordinary people organize, mobilize, and demand more from their leaders. Friends, it's time to challenge the systemic corruption of the two-party cartel and envision a future where democracy is not a commodity to be bought and sold, but a birthright to be fiercely protected and boldly reclaimed. And that, my friends, is the final word up front. My name is Sean Sainhart, and this is, of course, Coup Save America. Our guest today is Evan Jaqua, the founder of the Solutions Party, a grassroots movement that challenges the status quo and offers some bold solutions for reclaiming our democracy. Jake is here to tell us about some new and some might say radical ideas to open a new path for our country. And Evan will be joining us shortly, right after the break. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Our guest today, as I mentioned, is a not so average American. Evan Jaqua is currently a business owner, but has worked in many different fields, from ranch hand to computer engineer. He is a single parent who understands the immense challenges of having full responsibility of a child. Evan is also fluent in 4 languages, which I hate to say I am very lapse in, and has seen the world from the viewpoint of 4 different cultures. These include North American, South American, Japanese, and Chinese. In Evan's own words, he tells us, besides coming to appreciate the diversity of the world's people and cultures, what has struck me most is how much we all truly have in common. Everyone, regardless of country or culture, wants the same things: freedom, prosperity, and a bright future for their children. I consider this endeavor, which I call the Solutions Party, to be the culmination of a life that has been graced with a whole diversity of experiences. Now, let's bring on Evan and find out what the Solutions Party is all about and what it can offer to the American citizens like you and me. Jake, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you, Sean. It's a real honor to be here. I enjoyed your introduction very much. Your what you were talking about, the problems that plague our country now, and
Problem?
Get it.
What problems?
Well, yeah. Let me get started. The part I wanted just to give a little bit, a 10-minute or 10-second spiel about the Solutions Party, the blog that I've started. It's meant to propose a range of ideas because the problems that we have, the challenges that we have in our country are intertwined and very complex, yes. And it's just not one simple idea can solve it all. But the most fundamental idea of all is basically comes down to this, and I'm going to quote Ronald Reagan, who said that the government is not the solution, government is the problem. And I think he needed to be a little more specific, and I would say the problem, all of our problems in the final analysis boil down to our politicians. And the reason has to do with a very fundamental characteristic of the human brain. The human brain is a wonderful thing, but it forms addictions very easily. It forms addictions to things like alcohol, to drugs, to gambling, to social media. But probably the most addictive thing of all is power. And once politicians, people get power, they don't want to give it up, and they're going to do anything to keep it. Let's look at some more of the extreme examples. Like Vladimir Putin. He'd probably be a pretty nice guy if you were painting houses outside of Moscow. But you give him the power, and he's going to poison his political opponents. He's going to invade neighboring countries. He's going to rig elections. He becomes vicious. Or Kim Jong-un, the North Korean dictator who, sends entire families to gruesome prison camps and basically has his whole country in one big prison camp. He'd probably be a pretty nice guy if he grew up surfing in Hawaii. But as John Boehner, the former Speaker of the House, said, you give people little power and it completely changes them. And this is what happens with our politicians. Once they get in power, they do anything to stay in power. Now, you talked about the corporate interests. Well, this all comes down to this very basic symbiotic relationship that they have. It's the same relationship between a drug pusher and a drug addict. The drug addict is supplied the drugs by the drug pusher, and the drug pusher gets the money. Okay, well, this exact same relationship between the corporate interests and special interests, let's just say special interests is probably a little more general way to say it, and the politicians in power. So these special interests, they help to keep the politicians in power through direct donations, through misinformation, and probably one of the biggest ones at all is through spurring the culture wars. If you look at any culture war issue, there's somebody making a lot of money off it, there's somebody gaining a lot of power off it, or both. And so in order to, Sean, if I were a doctor and I had to prescribe to you a very addictive medication, how would I prevent you from getting addicted to it? Well, I would give it to you in limited portions spread apart. And that's exactly what we have to do with political power, because the minute reelection is on the table, that becomes the priority. That is why our politicians work for the special interests. That is why our politicians spend over half their time working to get reelected. That is why politicians put their partisan interests above the interests of the people. And as long as I say, reelection is on the table, that is going to become the priority. That just like this is something that you see not only in this country but all over the world. Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela, viciously holding on to power. Daniel Ortega, the Syrian dictator, the Iranian. It's something that's worldwide. It's something that's very fundamental to humans, and the only way to solve it is to give power in very limited segments, spread apart, so that reelection is not option. So the idea is that you get elected to office, you have one chance to make your mark on history. And are you going to use that chance to really do something good, to really make every effort to serve the voters and serve your nation, or are you going to do it for self-serving purposes? And my theory is that most people are going to want to do something that positive to establish their legacy. I mean, let me just say one more thing before I go on, is that how many times have you heard that, well, such and such politician is not up for re-election so they can vote their conscience? And it's like, shouldn't they always be voting their conscience? Why is it that only when they're not up for re-election is that they're going to, they're vote their conscience? They should be dedicating themselves 100% to doing their job and then to moving on. And just as an analogy, it'd be like, if you hired me to do a job on a 3-year contract and I spent over half my time just lobbying for a contract extension, I don't think you'd be very happy. And you'd want me dedicating myself 100% to doing my job. And so that's the fundamental problem, is the addiction to power that makes our politicians do anything, say anything to stay in power. So the fundamental idea behind the Solutions Party is let's end re-election. And then I offer a range of other ideas to strengthen our democracy, strengthen our judiciary, our journalism. All of these topics are intertwined. And so you can't just talk about doing one thing without addressing some of the other fundamental problems that we're dealing with these days. Some of the very fundamental and serious problems. And the final thing I want to say is that, and I'm sorry if this is a little long, but democracy is an experiment, a very radical experiment, a new experiment, because throughout history, how society's been run. They've been run by a small group of elites who pretty much dictated, how the rest of the population was going to live, or how they were what they were going to do. Democracy is a radical experiment where where you're giving the power to the average person, so that the average person, in theory at least, has as much power to decide over the fate of the nation, the direction of the nation, as the most powerful general or the richest individual. Now, there are a lot of people who don't like that. There are a lot of people who benefit from the idea from destroying democracy and going back to a society that's based on a very powerful elite. And if we lose our democracy now, the problem is the technology is now available to ensure that power structures can never be challenged, just like what's happening in China. They're implementing this surveillance state to ensure that they retain a permanent lock on power. So this is a critical time where we really have to address the weaknesses in our democracy and ensure that the power stays with the people. And the first step I propose is let's get rid of the reelection. Now, I think that a lot of people are ready for this idea. I think people are sick and tired of our politics. People are discontented. The only reason why Donald Trump is where he is because I think people are so desperate for change that they're willing to listen to a lying fraud, a complete lying fraud. That, by the way, I actually kind of consider myself conservative. I believe in free enterprise. I believe in democracy. But and I identified as a Republican, so it's not like I'm a lifelong liberal Democrat here. But I'll just say very clearly, he's clearly a lying fraud, and the only reason why his message is resonating with people is because people are so sick of the dysfunction and of our politics as usual. So I think that the atmosphere, the environment is ripe for change, and I think that these ideas, which I don't want these ideas. The reason I don't put my name on my blog, by the way, is because I don't want these ideas associated with me. The ideas should never be associated with one person. The ideas should be independent of the person, of any one person, and. So this is sorry, that's kind of a long-winded explanation, but this is a very complex subject and it's hard to talk about it in just little, sound bites.
Yes, I agree. And again, please feel free to talk as much as you want. I enjoy listening to you. I enjoy your blog immensely. I do want to ask you, I agree with the idea of term limits or the ending of re-election.
Yeah, it has to be limited to one term, because if you have re-election, even if it's just for one term, that is going to become the priority, and that's going to make them vulnerable to doing whatever they have to get their re-election, to getting re-elected. So that's why I say you've got to, and not only that, you've got to put a waiting period between elections. So if you run for Congress and you get elected to Congress, before you can run for governor or for senator, you have to wait 2 years, because otherwise they're going to use their present political position as a springboard for their next election. And we don't want that either. So anyway,
the critics who would argue that just, and I've had this conversation, this debate online many times. And, and the response that I've gotten from some is that no. If you don't have re-election, if you have term limits or anything of that nature, you're encouraging more corruption. Now, I don't buy that argument in the least bit. But what would you say to someone who makes that claim?
Well, we already have, sadly, an incredible, corruption galore in our political system. So, I disagree, because I believe, for one thing, that you're only going to have one chance to make a difference in history. And, I have an article on this called, What If Power Came in a Pill? And basically the idea is that you have one chance to do good, to do something positive. And are you going to squander that chance because of your own, a greedy, corrupt, desires? And the other thing is that I have an article also on corruption. I think that anybody who gets elected to office should be expected or should expect to have to be closely scrutinized, their finances. And, that's one of the things. You get elected, but you've got to expect that you're going to be scrutinized when it comes to your finances and other things. Like uh, you know, if you're I don't know, talking with certain corporate interests, and you're obviously going to be going to join their company after your election. That should raise a red flag. And so I think that if people, number one, who get elected are doing so, being told that you only have one chance to make a difference, and number two, you're going to be under a lot of scrutiny, and number three, as you mentioned, we have to get rid of this whole notion of private lobbying. We can have lobbying, but it should be in a public format. For example, if Exxon wants to lobby a representative, it should be done in a public format where people can make comments. But none of it, we got to get rid of this private lobbying. Take that out of the picture. Lobbying is okay, but it has to be done, in a public sort of way. And so yeah, I just, we have to start, and I call that a war on corruption, because now I know we're all tired of war on this, war on that, but I do believe, based on my experience around the world, is that the people are sick and tired of corruption. And I spent a lot of time in Peru, for example, and people, that the corruption is destroying the democracy. People are sick and tired of it, and it's something that's worldwide. And I think that a worldwide campaign to stamp out corruption, I present a bunch of different ideas to do that, I think would be well received.
The other problem with ending re-election that I see it is, how do we get to that point when politicians are so entrenched in power that they would have to be the ones to make that law?
Well, the idea is that we're not going to be able to get that codified into law anytime soon, but you vote for people who promise to serve one term. For example, somebody who's running for office, they have to promise to serve one term, not only serve one term, but work to get that codified. And so it has to be voluntary at first. You have to vote, people have to vote for people who promise to serve one term, people who are going to commit to spending 100% of their time, working for their constituents. And our elections should be about ideas and vision, and not about what it's become now, tribalism and emotion manipulation. And so somebody who presents their ideas clearly, has a vision that's appealing for a majority of voters, and who promises to serve only one term and spend their whole time doing what they have to implement the vision, I think can win elections. I think people with that message can win elections, much better than what we have now, who are politicians who, lie, just outright lie. They lie about what they stand for. They lie about what their opponents stand for, and we have to get lying out of our politics too. Somebody commented to me not too long ago, well, politicians just lie. That's just the way of the world. And probably 1,200, 2,000 years ago, it was probably normal for men to beat their wives. And it's just, that's just what men do. We have to have higher standards. And just like, if you caught me lying to you on a job interview, you would have every right to kick me out of the interview. Or if you caught me lying on the job, you would have every right to fire me. Well, politicians are blatantly lying, to get elected. They should be disqualified immediately. Because it's even worse when you lie to get elected to office than lying on a job interview, because you are lying in order to get the sacred power of the people. And that is a terrible violation of our democracy, and should not be at all tolerated. And so, we've got to get the lying out of it, and have our elections be about ideas and vision. If you're really confident about your ideas, you shouldn't have to lie about them. You shouldn't have to lie about your opponent stands for. It's just like, a salesperson. A salesperson who's really confident about what they're offering doesn't have to lie about it. They don't have to lie about the competition. They allow the product or the ideas or the service to stand on its own. And, lying is a sign of weakness when they don't have the ideas, they don't have the confidence to tell the people what they really stand for. But when you really have confidence in your ideas, you don't have to lie about them, and you don't have to make these ridiculous statements about what your opponent stands for, which is what we have now. These ridiculous attack ads, this ridiculous razzle dazzle marketing campaigns, and nobody really has any idea what anybody really stands for. Our politicians just kind of speak in this very ambiguous, offend nobody way, or they just out lie about what they stand for, what their opponent stands for, which is not what we want.
Right. How do we regulate political lying? What would be some strategies? I mean, would that involve a government body of some sort? How would we hold politicians to account?
Well, I think we have to have sort of like a Rotten Tomatoes way of doing things, where you have a variety of different ways to fact check, not just one or two fact checks, but you have, for example, you could have one of the. I actually worked for a while in the field of AI, and one of the things you could have is you could have a lot of this stuff automated, fact checking automated, but you would have independent and say certified committees who could actually also fact check, and then you take an average. And some things are going to be obvious lies. For example, when somebody says that Obamacare is tantamount to communism, that's an obvious lie. So or when Donald Trump says that windmills cause cancer or whatever, that obvious lies. Now, there's some things that are going to be maybe a little more ambiguous, and they could be rated so. But I think you have to have a variety of independent ways to assess, truthfulness, and then you take an average of that to help people decide. And if their rating, let's say their truthfulness rating, which is an average of these different evaluations, falls below a certain level, that they should be given a warning to change, to just start speaking more truthfully. And if it continues at a certain level, below a certain level for a certain amount of time, they should be disqualified. I mean, it's just you've got to encourage people to speak clearly, honestly, in a civil way.
Right. And what about like disqualifying them from debates, from ballots? How would we enforce that?
Well, I personally think that we want to have a free exchange of ideas. We want to have even what we might think of bad ideas. Sometimes a bad idea can be the inspiration for a good idea. But I think that you don't want to disqualify people unless they are being extremely disingenuous, obviously lying and not telling the truth. And so again, I think you have to have a truthfulness rating. I have an article in this called "No Country for Lying Politicians," and it basically comes down to that, where you have.
That's one of my favorite articles on your blog, by the way.
Oh, really? Well, I'm glad to know. We don't want any more George Santos type politicians, but banning people from debating or banning people from elections or from running for office is a very serious thing, and should only be done when something serious, let's say infraction, or what's the word I want? Not infraction. I don't want to say crime, but just a serious violation has occurred. And for a politician, that should be truthfulness. We want, once if our politicians are lying to us, they are doing an incredible disservice to the voters and to our democracy. And we have to, put into place a system that encourages politicians to be as truthful as possible, and also the fact that that you're getting rid of reelection. You would have no reelection. Hopefully, would also get rid of the lying cycle where politicians will say whatever they have to get reelected. And let's look at Mitch McConnell, for example. in fact, many politicians who have said very uh, accurate and very true things about Donald Trump, but when all the dust settles, their own positions of power be more than the integrity of a presidential candidate, and the place their own party ahead of the interests of the country, and that's just something we can't tolerate anymore.
Now, haven't the people themselves become extremely tribal and partisan in this country? I mean, is that not a problem in itself?
Well, that is a problem, but this is all. I think it's all by design. It's that the powers that be benefit greatly from having huge segments of the country completely tribalized, so they don't even have to try to win their votes. It's very, very bad for our country when people just automatically vote for one party or the other. And let's look at our presidential election right now as an example. Why is it that California is automatically blue? Why is it Texas is automatically red, or Florida is automatically red, or New York is automatically blue? And so our presidential elections have boiled down to basically 20 purple counties and a few purple states. Why is it that 3 counties outside of Milwaukee or 3 counties outside of Atlanta matter more than all of California, all of Texas? And this benefits the political party greatly. Donald Trump doesn't go to California to try to win votes. Kamala Harris doesn't go to Florida to try to win votes, but they should be looking for votes in every corner of the country. And this tribalism that we have, especially this electoral system that we have, basically really benefits them when you have just automatic voters, and then it just becomes this squabble over a few purple micro communities in a few purple states, which is something that is obviously what we don't want. But the way to get around that is, that's why I propose limits on political parties. I think that the problem with political parties, just like with any organization, is that organizations, as the great historian Carol Quigley of Georgetown University said, become institutionalized. And what does that mean? That means where the interests of the organization become even more important than what the organization originally stood for. And our political parties get institutionalized, and that means that the priorities of the party become even more important than the priorities of the country. And right now, the atmosphere is so poisoned that you have people who are only going to vote Democratic or only going to vote Republican, regardless of the ideas being proposed. And we don't want that. But political parties do serve a purpose, though. They are a good way for people of similar ideas to organize and present candidates accordingly. So we want the best of both worlds. We want to have political parties that serve as ways for people to organize around certain ideas and present their candidates, but we don't want them to exist so long that they become tribal, institutionalized, which is what we have now. So what you need is to put a 12-year, what I propose, a 12-year limit on political parties, government recognized political parties, which means that they will appear on ballots, and that's you don't want to have you want to have just a few, I believe, recognized political parties, because you don't want to have it too fragmented. But so that would encourage people to coalesce, to have diverse people coming together under certain ideas, so instead of having 20 micro silo parties. And so you have those a party coming together. After 12 years, it has to be disbanded. New parties that form cannot have as their leaders the leaders of the previous party. And some people might say, well, won't the new political parties just be carbon copies of the old ones? And I don't believe so. I think people, when they're going to start a political party, they're not going to say, we're just going to be like the old guys. So we're going to want to present new ideas, get new people to join, generate some excitement. And so one of the ways you get rid of the tribalism is to put a 12-year, or our 12-year could be a little more, a little less, but I think 12 years is a good number on a political party. And then you disband them, new political parties will form, new coalitions will form, and I think that'll generate the excitement and help diffuse some of the mindless tribalism that we have now.
Yeah, because right now it is like you said. Well, it's just insane. I mean,
Yeah,
it's created a division where you have Americans hating each other.
exactly. Exactly. Yes. You know, I can remember I worked in rural Utah when I was in the 70s. I was helping my brother-in-law deliver pop and soda pop and bread to rural markets. And I can remember how we could have, with different people, civil discussions about why you're going to vote for Jimmy Carter, are you going to vote for Gerald Ford? And now it's like, you know, it's just like so bitterly tribal that it's like if you say you're voting for one person or the other, you might be banished from your family as it is now, and it shouldn't be that way. And again, our elections and our politics have devolved into basically being based on tribalism and emotion manipulation, which we don't want. Just like our news organizations, so many of our news organizations are basically in the business of emotion manipulation. We want to get the emotions out of the out of control emotions out of the picture. We want to get the tribalism picture. We want our elections to be, again, about ideas and vision. And right now there's a great worldwide struggle going on between the democracies and the authoritarian autocratic countries, because these autocratic countries want to go back, and not only the leaders of the countries, but even people within our go back to a period in history when small groups of elites ruled over the rest of us. Now, a democracy should do far better than autocracy, because in autocracy there is no free flow of ideas. It's all about the one leader, and usually very paranoid and very vicious leader. In a democracy, in theory, should be far more superior, because you have a free flow of ideas, you have civility, and you have different visions that you can propose. But our democracy is greatly hobbled by the terrible tribalism and the lying and the dysfunction that we have now. And we have to, this is a critical time in history to address this, to address the weaknesses in our democracy. And I've tried to propose a range of ideas to do that, to really make our democracy help achieve its potential. Because once our democracy achieves its potential, our economy will also achieve its potential. We have what we want is widespread prosperity for all, opportunities for all. The greatest resource that's being wasted in the world today is actually human creativity. And there's so many, that's the greatest, and we want all people to have the chance to live a fulfilling life and to fulfill their potential as people. Everybody's got certain talents, and they should all be allowed or be provided the opportunity to develop those talents. That's the greatest wasted resource that we have now, and that has to be addressed.
And one of the things that I want to go back to tribalism for just a moment. Mm-hmm. Hasn't it really become a excuse to kind of be lazy in American politics as far as the electorate is concerned?
Oh, yes, exactly. I mean, again, one of the big problems in our elections now is that when people get a ballot, they just automatically, select one party or the other, and you don't want that. You don't want that. You see, there are great ideas really across the political spectrum, and we've got to get those ideas flowing and having people listening to the ideas in a civil way, in a non-emotional way, and then making the decision and moving forward. And so, we've got to, and I keep repeating this, but we've got to get what we have, as I say, our elections have devolved, our politics has devolved into tribalism and emotion manipulation. I mean, that rally in Madison Square Garden, how many ideas were really talked about? It was all about, riling up the troops and saying just remarkably disgusting things about about people, but that's what it's evolved to. It's devolved into this, we're with God, they're with the devil. I mean, for example, QAnon. Let's look at QAnon. I mean, you think about how ridiculous this is, that some guy that nobody knows who, posts that there's some satanic group that's kidnapping kids and drinking their blood, and it's associated with it. I mean, there's no proof of this, but people are so wound up emotionally that they'll believe anything because they want to believe it. And people, when they want to believe something, they'll believe it. If people want to believe that purple leprechauns from Mars are running things, they're going to believe it. And
wait a minute, are you saying that purple leprechauns from Mars are not running things? Are you making that claim right
here? Well, believe it or not, yes. And so, and the problem is when people are so emotionally this all gets down to the fact that people are frustrated. People get that things aren't working right. You have to be a multimillionaire to buy a house anymore. You have to be a multimillionaire to send your kids to school. People feel, if you want to destroy democracy, the first step to doing that is destroying people's belief that the pursuit of happiness is possible. People stuck on this, on this never-ending treadmill of struggling to make ends meet. One trip up away from being desolate, not being able to stay at home. And this is not what we want. People working, more and more hours, getting further and further behind. We want to have a society, and we can have a society where people have, decent lives, where they're dedicating a reasonable amount of time to work, where they have time for family, where they have time for going to the gym or learning a new skill, spending time with friends. We can achieve this. This is not impossible. It's not like some physics, like special relativity. Einstein said that it's impossible to go faster than the speed of light. These problems that we want to solve are not restricted to being solved because of some fundamental, physics-based restriction. These can be solved. The problem is the lack of political will and the lack of ideas. But we can make a society where prosperity is widespread, where people live decent lives, where they have opportunities for education, for fulfilling careers, and for healthier lifestyles. And we can make it work. We've just got to get our politics working the way they should.
Now, I want to ask you too. Mm-hmm. One of the problems not that America is not formally a democracy? I mean, the founders seem to have been among the elite interests of their time. Right. I mean, you have things like the Electoral College. You seem to have all of these guardrails on democracy. Mm-hmm. How much of a problem is that we don't have the entrenched democratic structures that, say, some other nations might have?
Well, the Electoral College needs to be reformed. It should not be, the first and simple reform would be to have it allocated on a proportional way instead of winner take all. So that if Kamala Harris wins 60% of the California vote, she gets 60% of the electoral votes, and Donald Trump gets 40, because that way that would encourage them all our candidates to campaign in all 50 states instead of just, California, that's for the Democrats, Texas, right, that's for the Republicans, which is absolutely ridiculous. Now, I happen to believe that a representative democracy where we do have representatives that we vote for can work because, for one thing, if it's just one term, then you're not going to have the reelection becoming the priority type of thing. But also, you want our elected officials to have a certain amount of wisdom, because public opinion, people can get emotional, polls can change this and everything, but you want to have people who are representative who are going to stand above that and kind of make decisions, whether they're popular or not. You see, if there's no reelection, okay, then they can have the courage to vote for something that they know is right, but might not be popular at the time. because that's what we want. We want courage in our politics, people who vote because they believe this is the best thing. It might not be popular, but it's the right thing to do. Instead of, oh gosh, if I do this, that's going to affect my reelection prospects, or that's going to hurt the chances of our party keeping control of the House, things like that. And so I do believe that a representative democracy can work, and it will work a lot better when partisan interests and the obsession with reelection and the addiction to power are out of the picture.
Yeah, no, I agree with that 100%. It just, wow, it just seems like, I mean, all of your ideas are very interesting, and I think a lot of them are very remarkable, very bold, and would go a long way to solving a lot of the problems that we have in this country. At the same time, it seems like we're so far away from any of these types of reforms from even being implemented.
I don't agree. I think that people are ripe for change. I believe that people are I don't want to use the word desperate, but let's just say desperate for change. I think that that once you explain to people what the source of our problems are, and the source of our problems are right in front of us, our lying politicians, our news media that is more interested, unfortunately, in emotion manipulation than they are in presenting the facts. And this gets, let me just talk for a second about the journalism. In the old days, it was not easy to start a news organization. If you want to start a newspaper, you had to have reporters, you had to have a printing press, you had to have a way to distribute the papers, you had to have a way to get advertising revenue. Starting a television station or a television network, or a radio network, this was a major endeavor. But now any Joe with a laptop and a website can, quote unquote, start a news site. And so the traditional news model has broken down, except for a very few very powerful legacy news organizations. That's why local news papers have folded, because the traditional news model has broken down. If you believe that as I do, that the pen is mightier than the sword, then let me just say this, and so what a lot of news organizations do now, like Fox News, which is I think the prime example, is that they're in the business of emotion manipulation. They're not in the business of really presenting facts. They're in the news, just as the author of what is it called, Foxocracy, a former Fox. He said they're in the business of emotion manipulation. That's and people get addicted to that daily dose of rage, of hate, and they provide it. They serve it up. They dish it up, and if you believe that our journalism is fundamental to the health of our democracy, just like I said, the pen is mightier than the sword, then we have to put at least as much priority into making our journalism as robust as possible as we do our national defense, because our journalism protects us from enemies from both within and without. Whereas our defense is, primarily for opponents, at least now anyway, for for enemies outside of our borders. And so we have to have, what I proposed is having an independent journalism pot, where journalists, certified journalists, we certify our journalists, and then if you're certified as journalists, you'll get a stipend every month, and that can increase depending on the quality, the relevancy of your articles, and the truthfulness of your articles, and the objectiveness of your articles. There'll be a whole range of parameters that you use to help grade a journalist, and the higher the grade, the higher the stipend they get. And this pot of money would not be just from the government, but could be from anybody can contribute to, because we want to make journalism a viable career again. We want to have journalists who can, work in a small town and make a decent living. And small town journalism is especially to keeping our local politicians in these smaller towns honest. These local journalists act as watchdogs on the corruption. And so we want to do what we have to make journalism great again. And it's absolutely crucial to our democracy. And once we have our journalism credible, people, as it is now, people don't, it's a terrible crisis, when so many of the people in our country don't believe in our journalism. But when you have people believing in our journalism again, I think that'll go also a long way to strengthening our democracy.
Hasn't journalism itself become polarized? I mean, for instance, you mentioned Fox News. There's also a very heavy leaning bias towards Democrats with organizations such as MSNBC.
I totally agree. That's exactly what I'm saying. That's exactly what I'm saying. The business model has gone away from providing news in an objective, a fair format. It's become a business of emotion manipulation. That's what it's become, emotion manipulation, because presenting news in the traditional way is just no longer viable. People don't, it's not a viable business like it used to be back, for most history of our country. And so we have to just recognize that journalism is not anymore a realistic business anymore. It has to be something that is supported independently, because we want to have our journalism, we have to view it as with the same, just like our national defense is not a business. We don't have Apple, running our Navy. We don't have Microsoft running the Marines. We have, a pot of money that we waste in so many ways for our national defense, in an inefficient way. But we want to have a pot of money to support our journalism, and we want to have our journalists certified, just like we have doctors certified, just like we have lawyers certified, just like we have database engineers certified, just like we have truck drivers certified. We want to have our journalists certified and then also graded. And so a certification would be like a bachelor's degree, like it's just like, a title, like a degree that they get. But then beyond that, their grades, would be like their transcript. Are their articles well written? Are they relevant? Are they objective? Do they have sources that are clearly identified? And based on that grade, they get a higher stipend. And this would apply to news organizations as well. So if a news organization like Fox is not objective, is basically in the emotion manipulation business, they wouldn't be certified. Okay, and this is especially important in the age of deep fakes. If I have a deep fake video if I make a deep fake video of you, Sean, doing something horrible, I don't know, selling drugs on the street. Okay, the first question is that video posted on a certified news site or not? If it's not on a certified news site, then you could pretty much assume that it's fake. But if something awful or whatever is something is posted on a certified news site, then you can have high confidence that this is actually something real. If this audio of this politician supposedly bribed or getting bribed, is that a deep fake or is that something authentic? And if we have certified news sites, that would help us judge it. If it's on Joe Sixpack's website, okay, probably not authentic. If QAnon is just something that's been put on some blog somewhere, it's probably not authentic unless there's evidence shown on a certified news site by a certified journalist that there's some reason to believe that this stuff is true. But this is especially critical in the age of AI generated fake information and fake videos and audios.
I want to just ask you, because I'm kind of curious, when did you kind of first cement the idea of the Solutions Party?
Well, the thing is I've had the wonderful opportunity, as I mentioned, of seeing the world from different points of view, living in communist China, living in Japan, living in South America and in this country, and just seeing the commonality and seeing that really, no matter where you go, the problem is with our politicians, and in particular, addiction to power. Addiction to power, what had happened, I lived with a family for many years that suffered terribly under communism. And, this one individual I knew would wake up at night, or would actually scream at night when he would relive in his nightmares what he went through in a communist prison. And, why was Mao, the Chinese dictator, so ruthless? Why was Stalin so ruthless? And, it all comes down to this vicious addiction to power. And our politicians are susceptible to it too. I mean, maybe our politicians don't drop barrel bombs, on civilians, but they'll do pretty much I don't want to say anything else that, to stay in power. It's the movie or the book Lord of the Rings is all about the addiction to power. It's a great human weakness, and we're going to have a democracy where we're going to have people to whom we allocate public power. Okay, that's great, but we have to do it in a way that minimizes the risk of addiction, because once you give people power, they're not going to want to give it up unless you have a system in place that forces them to give it up.
Right. Yeah. Which brings me to my next point. You have on your blog a proposal for limiting terms in government to, I think it's 5 years. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, basically, one of the things I've also seen is I've actually worked with government employees in Japan, in Peru, and in this country, and there tends to be sadly, kind of I don't like to pick on government employees, but I'll just be brutally honest, kind of a bureaucratic mindset. And in a bureaucratic environment, people tend to work toward the lowest common denominator because everybody wants to kind of conform. Nobody wants to stand out. And so it becomes very, very inefficient. And I can remember I went to a post office once, and this one postal worker was going out of her way to help a customer who didn't speak English very well. She, this one postal worker could speak Chinese, and her other postal workers were just haranguing her because she was doing something extra to help. And unfortunately, you get a kind of a lifelong bureaucratic mentality where it's, instead of simplify and solve, it's more like create complexity, justify existence. And so one of the ways I think you could get around that is that wherever possible and as much as possible is you make government employment limited to 5 years, number one. And that way they know that they're not going to be lifetime government employees. And so hopefully that would help minimize this sort of government employee mentality that people who work in government too long tend to keep. But not only that, you encourage them to find ways to make government more efficient. Right now, for example, we have a system where, if you have this much money allocated to your department in a given year, and you only spend this much, well, at the end of the year, you're kind of encouraged to spend whatever in whatever way so that you get the same amount allocated the next year. You don't want to spend less than what you've been allocated. But what we want is for people, maybe college graduates, coming in there, knowing that they're only going to be there for 5 years, and giving them encouraging them to find ways to make things more efficient, to save money, and then you give them a reward, a commission, and then they can come up with ideas to make things more efficient. So we want to have our government employees working to make government more efficient, using tax dollars ever more efficiently. And the other thing about this is that, after 5 years, you have to move on. You'll get maybe severance pay, but you will have gained experience. You will have a way to pay off your college loans. Hopefully, will be a lot less than they are now, and you can move on to to other things. But that will open up positions for new people. See, one of the hardest things for people graduating from college now is getting that first job, and sometimes you have to get it within 3 or 4 or 6 months of your graduation before you start looking like people get discouraged, and it becomes increasingly harder to find a job right out of college the more time passes. Well, if you've got tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of government jobs opening up, this would be for those who can't find employment in the private sector immediately. Well, this would be an option where they could get a job. They don't have to panic. I mean, I know so many college graduates who get great degrees from great colleges, and they graduate and they can't find anything. They can't find any work. And that, combined with the fact that so many of them have tens of thousands, in some cases hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt, and which condemns them to economic slavery for decades. And so we need to educate or reform our education so that doesn't happen, number one. But number two is if you have government employment limited to 5 years, that means you're going to have a lot of turnover, which means you're going to have a lot of potential jobs for, especially for younger people to come in and take those jobs, get some experience, get some savings, and then move on. And so that's one of those are the reasons why I suggest limiting it to 5 years, to make government more efficient and to offer potential employment to some of the most vulnerable people. Those are the recent graduates from high school and college.
Now, wouldn't that in some respects be harmful in terms of positions where experience does matter, where experience over the long term, for instance, maybe environmental policies or something of that nature?
Well, I totally agree, except that, I think a lot of jobs in the government can probably be done without having to have a lot of experience. And if a lot of experience is needed, well, maybe they can be reformed. These jobs can be reformed so that experience is not so necessary. And then for the jobs that do require a lot of experience, now I'm not saying that this is going to work for every government job.
Okay.
And there's some government jobs like let's say military leaders. So obviously you don't want to have people with military experience leaving after 5 years. And certain inspectors that require specialized knowledge for certain things. Aircraft like in the FAA. People who've been working for decades and really understand aircraft design. But on the other hand, you could also have a situation where people with experience would leave government, but could be retained on an as-needed basis, to advise some of the people with less experience. And so you want to have the best. I like to use the best of both worlds, where maybe they wouldn't be lifetime government employees. Maybe for some of the ones that require more experience, some of the positions require more experience, you could have them leave after a certain amount of time, but still be retained on an as-needed basis.
Okay, because the FAA was going to be an example I presented as well, which is a great example. Or the NTSB, for instance, that investigates aircraft crashes.
Yes, exactly. I totally agree. You don't want to have it just be all or nothing. But where possible, trying to get government jobs like postal workers, for example. You can have people delivering mail. That probably doesn't require a lot of experience, or even people working in the post office. There are probably lots and lots and lots of government jobs that number one, don't need a lot of experience, or number two, could be reformed so that they don't need lots of experience to do well. And again, I think that would have multiple benefits, because these new employees, these new people coming in, okay, we're going to give you a commission if you can come up with ways to make things more efficient, make our government work better for less. Because right now, governments tend to be extremely inefficient when it comes to money. And every tax dollar, whether it's spent at the EPA or where it's spent at the Pentagon, should be thought of as a sacred national resource that needs to be used wisely. Because for every dollar that's thrown into, that's given to a government entity, is a dollar taken away from, investing in education, or giving back to people. As a tax break, and which they could use the money to go spend and stimulate the economy. So we have to think of dollars sent to the government as sacred and need to be used efficiently. And one of the ways to do that, I think, is to encourage new people who don't have a long-term interest in, being a long-term vested interest in the organization, finding ways to make things work better.
Moving on a similar example, the federal judiciary. You have proposals for that as well that I find very interesting and very pertinent to what we're seeing today.
Well, the thing about, if our politicians really cared about our democracy, they would work to do exactly the opposite of what they're doing now. And what are they doing now? They are trying to make the judiciary an extension of their own political party.
Yes.
Our Supreme Court has become a complete partisan joke, and it has pretty much zero credibility. And this is the problem when politicians, instead of they should be crafting the judiciary to be as independent from partisanship as possible, because once the judiciary becomes associated with partisanship, it has zero credibility. It's no better than what they do in Venezuela, no better than what they do in Syria, no better than what they do in China, where the judiciary is just basically an extension of the political party in power. And that's the worst thing we could have. Our politicians need to do exactly the opposite. So one of the things that I proposed is that, for example, if a Supreme Court position becomes open, that the president should be given a range of ideas of candidates for that position, but who are going to help increase the diversity, the judicial philosophy, the diversity of the judicial philosophy at the court, to reduce the partisanship, increase the diversity of thought. Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Anthony Scalia were actually really good friends, even though they had completely different judicial philosophies, because they understood one thing that our politicians don't seem to understand, and that is the judicial diversity actually serves the American people better when there is a real exchange of ideas at the Supreme Court or at the appeals court, instead of just a block of Republican appointees ramming through their decisions. We want all Americans to believe that when the Supreme Court decides, they're doing so independently of partisan interests, which is what we don't have now. And we have this whole phenomena of judge shopping. Well, if you want, a Republican wants a favorable decision, they go to this judge, or the Democrats want a favorable decision, they go to that judge. We don't want that. So number one is to try to encourage our politicians to get partisanship out of the judiciary. Number two, putting term limits on the judiciary, because right now the Supreme Court appointees are akin to nuclear weapons in the culture wars. And number three, rotating our justices around so that, like, the Ninth Circuit Court and the Fifth Circuit Court and the other circuit courts, the judges are periodically rotated around so that they don't get associated with one party or the other, like the Fifth being the Republican-friendly one, the Ninth being the Democratic. We don't want that. We want our judiciary to be constantly stirred up and nonpartisan, and a flow of ideas of different judicial philosophies, not 9 guys named Anthony Scalia in the Supreme Court, not 9 people from the Federalist Society. We want to have people who come from a series of different backgrounds, different judicial philosophies, and that'll much better serve the American people and much more strengthen our democracy.
Speaking of democracy, another proposal that you have is, and I think it's titled "Let's Make Elections Great Again," or
yes,
something to that effect.
Yes,
and
exactly.
You talk about creating incentives for voters to actually educate themselves on issues and vote based on that information. Can you kind of go into some details on how that works?
Yeah, Winston Churchill said, the problem with democracy, if you want to know what the problem with democracy, have a 5-minute conversation with the average voter. And that's exactly the problem we have now. Too many voters, and I won't deny that I'm guilty of this too, is that are deciding elections based on just, maybe a couple pet issues, or based on just tribalism, or based on, misinformation or downright lies. Maybe they saw an attack ad on somebody and they decide they're going to vote against them, or they saw some razzle-dazzle marketing campaign ad on and they're going to, we don't want to have, that's one problem, is that too many voters are making choices based on extremely superficial knowledge or actually just downright misinformation. And the other problem is that we should have something closer to 100% voter participation.
Right.
And so right now, as we have it, we have a minority of, putting it in a kind of an extreme way, we have a minority of ill-informed voters deciding the direction of the country. And we don't want that. We want to have as many as voters as possible, close to 100% of our well-informed voters making decisions. So the way to do that, I feel, is that you give, incentives for people to learn the issues and to vote. And, for example, you can have a quiz, before each election. And depending on your score, if you get, say, 16 out of 20, then you could have a list of goodies that you could select. Maybe it could be a free pass to national parks. Maybe it could be a discount on Amtrak. Maybe it could be an Apple gift card. An Apple would get a tax break for this, or a Starbucks gift card, or an Amazon gift card. And so that if you get, and you can retake the test, and if you ace it, then you get even more benefits. And if you do this consistently and you vote, that you can only get the gift card if you take the test, get a reasonable score on the test. I should say the range of goodies, and if you vote. And if you do that, I think that you've got to give people incentives to vote, and to learn the issues and to vote. And you want to have our voters going, when they go to the ballot box or when they vote, they're doing so with good knowledge of both sides, both the arguments, the ideas, the visions of both sides presented. And instead of having it as it is now, where they're voting based on marketing campaigns or just pure tribalism, or maybe one or two pet issues. And so you give them incentives to vote, and give them incentives to really learn the issues. And you want to even have this done at the elementary school level, where kids, they're not going to actually vote, in real elections, but where they're encouraged to, have these same debates and have a kids vote, at the schools, where the kids vote would just be very interesting to compare to the real vote. If 60% of the kids are voting for this issue, whereas 60% of adults are voting for another issue. Well, the question is, why do the kids find this issue? Why are they interpreting this? This is very different than what, and why? That would be very interesting to know. But it would also encourage kids to develop a passion for learning the issues and debating civilly, in a civil manner amongst themselves, because that's what we want. We want we want people to discuss and debate, but in a civil and respectful way. And I think we should encourage that, from the get-go in schools.
And you have another portion. Well, I want to talk about the culture wars, for instance.
Okay.
And how that has kind of exacerbated our democracy's problems.
Well, I think we have to sit back for a second. First of all, recognize the culture wars are a sham. They are a sham. Okay. Look at people have always disagreed. People are always going to disagree. The fundamental question is, how do we handle those disagreements? Okay. Now, in the old days, when we disagreed, what did people do? Well, they sharpened the spears, they sharpened the swords, and they went at it, and the best band of brawlers won. But eventually, humans figured out that wasn't the best way to achieve progress. And so, we came up with this system where we're going to debate our differences. We're going to vote on the best idea, on the ideas, and we're going to move forward. But unfortunately, we're going back to a period of this mindless tribalism, emotionally, out of control emotions-based a tribalism, which benefits the politicians, and it benefits of the special interests. Let's take a real simple example. The fossil fuel industry. Okay, the fossil fuel industry, okay, how do they support their politicians? Okay, they support them in three ways, as I've mentioned earlier. One is they can direct contributions. Number two, through misinformation, saying that, well, the science on climate change is still unsettled and all this stuff. But number three, and the biggest one of all, is turning this into a culture war issue where, well, real Americans like cheap gas and hippies want green energy. It's just ridiculous. And but this benefits them. This benefits the fossil fuel industry and the politicians who align themselves with this culture war issue. And so, as I've said earlier, you look at any culture war issue, and there's somebody making a lot of money. There's somebody, staying in power because of it. Now, I think that once you get rid of reelection, and these special interests don't have the control over the politicians that they do now, and the politicians aren't going to feel as dependent on the special interest, because they're not going to be reelected, so there's no reason to continue to toe the special interest line. I think they're going to have the special interests will have a lot less control over our politicians once reelection is out. And I think that once you have journalism that's credible, once you have the lying out of our politics, once you have emotional manipulation out of our journalism, once you have our judiciary being credible again, I think that'll go a long way to diffusing these mindless and completely unproductive culture wars that we have now. This is really critical that we address this, because it's just become too vicious and too out of control.
Do you think that these culture wars are leading people to an authoritarian mindset where they prefer an autocracy?
Oh, yes, exactly. I absolutely, because what happens is that democracy is a competition of ideas. And, a lot of people don't like to compete. And so what they want to do is they want to have a system where they don't have to compete anymore. And they think that that's the solution. Well, it's not the solution. It's only going to make things worse, because, you hear this argument, okay, maybe we should have the red states and the blue states should just go their separate ways and secede. And this idea is that, okay, you're going to have a red state Garden of Eden and you're going to have a blue state Garden of Eden. And you know what? No, that isn't how that's going to work, because within the red states and between the red states, pretty soon disagreements are going to occur. And pretty soon you're going to find politicians who are going to exacerbate those disagreements for their own research purpose. And you're going to have the exact same phenomena just repeat all over again. I mean, there's a reason why, for example, the Muslims kill each other, the Shiites and the Sunni, or why the Christians kill each other, the Protestants and the Catholics, or why the communists kill each other, is because people are always going to disagree. And the politics of division is basically a never-ending spiral to nowhere, because you're always going to, even within the Republican Party, you have this vicious, well, you're a rhino stuff. Are you pure MAGA or what? And on the left side, you have that too.
Yeah.
And the politics of division is even if you separate and go your different ways, pretty soon those differences that at first seem so insignificant are going to become fight to the death, mortal reasons to attack each other. And so, people, as I say, are always going to disagree. And the key is how you handle those disagreements, and breaking the country up and getting rid of your opponent is not going to be a long-term solution, because hatred, unless you make an effort to expunge it from your heart, hatred. Even if you vanquish and get rid of the source or the object of your hatred, unless you get that hatred out of heart, you're just going to find something new to hate. And, so suppose that, the Republicans could get rid of the MAGA could get rid of everybody who's not MAGA. Okay, is that going to become a MAGA Garden of Eden? No, because I guarantee you, within 5 years, there are going to be divisions within the MAGA. And there are going to be people who are going to exacerbate those divisions, and there's going to become emotionally charged and hatred within that, and it's just the cycle is going to repeat. And so, we have a very dangerous situation where the emotions are out of control, and this is exactly what autocrats want. This is exactly the Cultural Revolution in China. That was made possible by the fact that Mao could manipulate the emotions of a certain segment of the society to attack the other segment of society. And this is what autocrats, wily autocrats, do. They manipulate the emotions of people, get them turning on each other, and for their own benefit.
Would you call Donald Trump an autocrat?
Well, let's look at let's think about Donald Trump for a second. Okay, he's a man who was born into extreme wealth, extreme privilege. He's never had to look for a job. He's never had to struggle to make a payment. He's never had to, send out his resume. He's never known he knows about as much what the average American goes through as he knows what it's like to be a fighter pilot or an NFL quarterback, maybe, what he sees in the movies. And he's run his organization, from the get-go, ever since he was old enough to do so, like a dictator, like an autocrat. And I think that's the only thing he really understands, to be honest. I don't think he has any appreciation for democracy. He wants to rule exactly how he rules his company, in this sort of, placed on a pedestal, and dictates how things should be run. So, and the fact that you listen to him saying things like, "Oh well, Putin is a strong leader," and the fact of the matter is that autocrats are not strong leaders. It's exactly the opposite. They're weak leaders. They're weak, and they have to depend on the tools of government, like the armed forces, to stay in power. A strong leader doesn't have to do that. A strong leader leads by ideas, convinces people, gets people behind them because of the strength of their vision and their ideas. The weak leader, like Putin, like Nicolas Maduro, these are weak men of small character who have to use the tools of government, whether it be the armed forces or the media, the state-controlled media, or the secret police, to stay in power. These aren't strong people. These aren't strong leaders. And Donald Trump is, the fact that he admires these people, says a lot about his understanding of what it means to be a strong leader. He reminds me of somebody who inserts himself at the front of the angry parade and yells the loudest. But I guarantee you, if he starts saying things that his MAGA crowd doesn't like, they'll turn on him. And he basically just says what they want to hear. He's a fourth-rate sales guy who basically just says what he knows his people want to hear. And what they want to hear is about how bad, how the country's problems come down to people of different opinion, people who look different. And it's classic. And that's not the problem at all. The problem is our politicians. Yeah. As I say, we have to celebrate the diversity of our ideas. And, just on a very personal note, and I'll just say this very quickly, I actually went to a small liberal arts college, and it was liberal in every sense of the word. Now, I was a young Republican. I had just gone through voting for Proposition 13 in California. I was stanchly anti-Soviet. I was pro-capitalist. And I can tell you, I got into, a lot of emotionally charged discussions with my fellow students. But I can say this, that after all the heated arguments, after all the intense debating, after all the points and counterpoints had been made, we could still go and have lunch together. We could still have dinner together. We could go have coffee together, study together, laugh together. Because even though we disagreed sharply, we all knew that the other had the best interest in heart. I mean, that we all wanted the same thing, freedom and prosperity. We just had different ideas, but we learned from each other. And even though we had our arguments, we never, let it get out of control. And that's what we need in our country, respecting our different ideas, getting inspiration from our different ideas, picking the best ideas, and moving forward. And if your ideas are so great, then you have nothing to fear from democracy. Because if your ideas are so great, sooner or later, they will prevail. And so if you have real confidence in your ideas, then you should believe in democracy and not have to go to a system of autocracy to impose them, because that's not a sign of strength.
There's been people, a network called the Young Turks has done some very interesting interviews with MAGA supporters. And they've been asked outright the question, if you could choose between Kamala Harris as a president and Donald Trump as a dictator, who would you choose? Mm-hmm. An alarming number of them has said that they would choose the dictator over the president.
Well, this is the problem. That this all comes down because so many people, sadly, are losing faith in our democracy. And our democracy is not functioning because of our power-addicted politicians. Okay, and this is the real tragedy. Our democracy can only work. It should be a far more superior system to a dictatorship. We've already talked about the weaknesses of a dictatorship. But when people start believing that our democracy is not a way to solve our problems and to advance, then yeah, they start looking for other solutions. Dictators, they start blaming other people with different opinions or who look different as the source of the problem, and that's not the source of the problem. We have to celebrate our diversity. We don't want, if you want a country where only one opinion is loud, look at North Korea. Look at, I mean. I could tell you a little story, and I will maybe if we ever have a chance to talk again about the experience I had with North Korea, and I can tell you it was horrific. I mean, it's a horrific country, and it's only getting worse because of their ability to clamp down on any internal sin because of the new technology, just like in China. And we have to understand that competition is hard. Competition is whether it's in the marketplace or it's in of products or services, or if it's a marketplace of ideas. But it's the best way. A competition of ideas is the best way for societies to progress instead of a monopoly on ideas. And a dictatorship represents a monopoly of ideas, and it's a very weak way to run a society. And I think people, once they realize that a dictatorship is, and by the way, the dictator in the final analysis only, cares about himself, herself. Right. As soon as he doesn't need you, he's going to toss you. And that's exactly, that happens over and over and over again. The dictator, no matter how many times he says he loves you, he doesn't love you. He only loves himself. And so going down the path of, destroying our democracy and having some tough guy, run things it would be a complete disaster. It's historically been shown to be a disaster. It's not the way forward for our country. The way forward for our country is through honest debate and civility and addressing what the weaknesses of our democracy are. And by the way, once we have a robust democracy, there's no misinformation that Russia or Iran or China can do to influence our elections. Right now, our democracy is like a sickly lion being attacked by jackals. But if the lion's healthy, the jackals won't come anywhere near him. And we have to nurse our democracy back to the healthy lion that it should be, instead of the sickly lion that it is now.
Well, that leads me to my next question. Let's say that Donald Trump is reelected. Is that survivable?
I think so. I think so. It's going to be it's going to be what do I want to say? It's going to be a challenge. It's going to be a real challenge. But I think that sooner or later, and probably sooner, people are going to realize that having him as trying to destroy our democracy, maybe some people will find that appealing, but I think that it's like Winston Churchill said. I believe Winston Churchill said this. Maybe I'm wrong on this, but he said Americans always do the right thing after they've tried everything else, and I tend to believe that. I tend to believe that if we go down the path of Donald Trump, and he tries to do some really terrible things, that I believe that there are enough people in this country who are going to reject that. I do believe that this country still has enough people who believe in democracy, and I think that the people who support him and who are in favor of this dictatorship stuff, I think once you point out the dangers of a dictatorship and the place where we are in our history, not only as a country but as a species, that the only way forward for humanity is through democracy and not through an autocracy, where a small group of elites have a permanent lockhold on power. That's exactly what we want to avoid. In fact, I even have an article called the Coming Cast of Gods, which talks about a nightmare scenario where if we go back to a situation where you have a small group of elites, running the world, kind of an alliance of autocrats, because they have the technology to help ensure that that power is never challenged. And this is why we have to envision a world. Actually, we have to envision a world without autocracies. We have to work toward a world without autocracies, and I think we can do that. When Ronald Reagan said, we need to throw communism on the ash heap of history, people laughed. People thought, this guy, what's he been smoking? But within 10 years, the Soviet Union collapsed. And why did it collapse? It collapsed exactly for the reasons that he said. He said that nobody wants to live under the thumb of a dictator. Nobody wants to, live under control of a bully. And how did we win the war against the Soviet Union? Well, we didn't win it by sending cruise missiles and ICBMs. We won it through a prosperity and freedom gap. And if our democracy is working and our economy is subsequently working because our politics were working, that freedom and prosperity gap will become eventually so great that the autocracies will collapse. When people worldwide believe that democracy is the way to achieve prosperity and improve everybody's lives, then the autocracies will collapse permanently. And this is what we need to aim for, a world without autocracies. If some country wants a communist government, hey, that's fine. As long as they retain the power to remove that government through a free, fair, and peaceful election. If they want to have a theocracy, okay, that's their choice. But they have to retain the power to remove that government through a free, fair, and peaceful election. And as long as the people retain that power, let them choose what they feel is best. But as long as they never relinquish the power to make a change in that government. And for any government that doesn't allow for change through free, fair, and peaceful elections has to be thought of as illegitimate. I don't think of Putin's government as legitimate. I don't think of the Chinese Communist party-run government in China as legitimate, because the people cannot make a change to that government through a free, fair, and peaceful election. And any government that's in power through brute force is not legitimate in my mind. And we've got to work to a world without that, and it can be achieved by getting our democracy in order, our economy in order, and having an ever greater freedom and prosperity gap between them and us.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. One of the things that kind of shocked me that seemed to stand out on your blog was the idea of making a transcontinental bikeway.
Yeah, I think this is just kind of a fun idea, but many smaller communities withered and died when we did the interstate freeway system, because they bypassed these smaller towns. And so this is an idea to help bring some prosperity to some of the smaller communities. Let's build, at least one and maybe ideally more transcontinental bikeways that I think would be immensely popular, because it would bring people from around the world who want to go see our country. They could go the entire country, or they could do certain segments. It could be open to trekkers, to joggers, and they would purposely go through some of the smaller communities. And they would create jobs just making it. It would have jobs, to support it along the way. You could have airstrips at certain segments along the way, so that certain people wanted to do just one segment of the transcontinental bikeway, they could do it. And so I think that this would draw a lot of attention to the world. I think it would bring a lot of people to and encourage people to. I think it would be immensely popular, and I think it would bring jobs to smaller communities along the route. And you could have semi routes that would go to other smaller communities that are a few miles away. And so yeah, it's a way to kind of reverse what happened with do something the opposite of what happened with the internet and the intercontinental highway system, which caused so many smaller communities to do it. It would bring prosperity or bring jobs back to these smaller communities. And also, I think it would just be a real popular thing worldwide. Bikers from around the world, or joggers from around the world, trekkers from around the world would go and use this. And so it's just sort of a fun idea that I would like to see, more than one actually, maybe one from LA to Jacksonville, one from, San Francisco to Boston, and one from, Seattle to, and then you could have north and south ones too, from Chicago to Austin, and from Boston to Florida, and having a network of these, I think would really would be a lot of fun. Would encourage people to exercise, encourage people to get to know our country, bring jobs to local communities, which is what we want to do. We want prosperity everywhere in our country, not just in the big cities. We want to make it viable again to live in a small community, rural communities.
Yeah. It really stood out to me because I was reading through all of these very serious, in-depth topics, and all of a sudden I come across, wait a minute, build a bike. Where does this fit in on democracy? But after reading it, I totally agree with you. I think it's a great idea. I want to talk,
please.
Oh,
sorry.
I was going to say, I want to talk to you about your proposal, which I found surprising, about ending the war on drugs, which I totally agree with 100%.
The thing, okay, let's look back on the war on drugs. President Nixon, he was a smart guy. He had to have known, I'm sure he knew, that the war on drugs would be about as successful as prohibition was. In other words, a dismal failure. All it does is it's created this perverse situation where we have ever more Americans sending ever more bundles of cash to these drug cartels in Central and South America. These drug cartels have so much money. They control the politicians, they control the armed forces, they control the police, they control the judges. And this is one of the great sources of our immigration problem, because these drug cartels are just ruthless. And they're not only drugs, they're into human trafficking. They take over industries like the avocado industry. And on this side, in this country, why do people get addicted to drugs? Well, because for one thing, they're presented with drugs. They're drug pushers in our schools. This is big business for them. Okay, the whole problem with the war on drugs is it's just made it a huge business of the drug cartels and the drug pushers, and so in order to win this drug war, we have to destroy the economics. If you destroy the economics, you win the drug war. You stop the pushing in the schools. You stop the flow of money to the drug cartels. And so the only way to do that is to make, and this sounds incredibly radical, but you just make it free. If somebody wants to take drugs, we'll just give them those drugs, okay? But you combine that with education. I have an article on addiction. And you start from an early age in schools. You have an addiction day, a national addiction day, where you teach kids, you bring in speakers, you talk to them about the dangers of addiction, whether it be to drugs, whether it be to gambling, whether it be to alcohol, tobacco, and
power.
Exactly, power. And then you also invest in treatment. Now, some people are going to choose to abuse drugs. Okay, now, those people who abuse drugs, is it better to have them, living on the street where they shoot up, or where they relieve themselves, or they engage in sexual activity, or they threaten people, or you just put them in some humble place, give them their drugs, you give them access to treatment, and I think that would pay for itself, because the downtown areas, like in Portland, for example, where I am now, would be revitalized. People don't want to go to downtown Portland anymore because of all the people shooting up fentanyl. People don't want to live downtown anymore because of all the problems. If you get rid of that, you'll bring back tourism, you'll bring back business, you'll bring back, make it an attractive place to live again. And so, we want to, we just have to recognize that the war on drugs has been a dismal failure, and the reason it's been dismal failure is because the money is just too appealing. And we catch a drug lord like we did recently, but that doesn't solve the problem. New people are just going to become the new drug lords, and these cartels, they control so much. They control the governments, like Mexico. There's the corruption in Mexico and in Peru, where I spend most of my time, and it's just so deep because of all this drug money. And if you want to destroy the drug war, you want to win the drug war, you destroy the economics. You cut off the head of the economic head of the serpent. And the way to do that is you make it unprofitable. Any drug, somebody wants to get drugs, they can have them for free. No conditions, no questions asked, but you can't live on the street. If you're going to use those drugs, we'll offer you a place to live where you can shoot up all you want. You can get treatment if you want. You can get, access to services to help get your life back on order. But we have to recognize that the war on drugs has been a failure, and it's going to continue to be a failure. It's going to continue to be a source of desperate people, coming to our borders, escaping this horrific drug cartel violence. These people who talk about, they don't want immigrants here. Well, I can guarantee you this, that if the drug cartels knocked on their door here in this country and said, okay, we want your son to join our cartel, he's going to work for us, your daughter's going to service us, and if you don't like it, we're going to kill you all. And the only place to go, you couldn't go to the police because the police are run by the cartel. You couldn't go to your politician. You had nowhere to go. And the only safe place to go was Mexico. I can guarantee you a lot of Americans would be hablando español and going to Mexico. And that's exactly why we have it's one of the main reasons why we have this immigration crisis. And, building a wall to stop it is like putting a Band-Aid on an oozing tumor. Maybe it keeps maybe cosmetically it looks good, but it doesn't address the source of the problem. And one of the biggest sources of the problem is this drug cartel, or the drug war, the drug business. And number two, the terrible corruption, which is one of the issues I also talk about, how to help get corruption out of not only our country, but working on an international level to really take on corruption, because it's such a devastating problem that robs so many people of so many opportunities and opportunities to improve their lives and live a decent life.
Yeah, I would agree. And our foreign policy in general seems to be a driving force of immigration as well, is it not?
Well, I tend to believe that the immigration problem comes down to several things. One is again the war on drugs. Number two, the corruption. And I believe that if you didn't have the drug cartels, if that was out of the picture, and number two, you got the corruption. Most people, for example, South and Central and South America, love their countries. They're very family-oriented people. They don't want to leave, and they won't leave if there are great opportunities in their own country.
Right.
And so, we have to work together to stamp out corruption on, ideally a worldwide level. This has to be a global effort. But number two, specifically, we have to do our part to destroy the economics of the drug war. And I think that those two things would help immensely to this. And oh, by the way, I also talk about, immigration on our, we have to, right now, the immigration problem is actually being used by the autocracies to attack our democracy. That's what, why that Belarus dictator is sending, refugees from Syria into Europe, because he knows that destabilizes the democracy there. That's why Nicolas Maduro and Daniel Ortega are sending, have forced so many people into the democracies of Central and South America and here. He knows that weakens the democracy. We have to come up with ideas to make immigration work for us and work against them. And so I've tried to propose some ideas to make that happen, where immigration is actually a way to contribute to our prosperity. And one of the ways to do that is that right now so many smaller towns are dying because the populations is sort of this death spiral of younger people leaving and no opportunity. Well, immigration can help reverse that. And for communities who are willing to bring in a variety of immigrants who agree to assimilate, they can provide construction, they can provide senior health care, they can provide a whole, tourism services, and help revitalize this. This is what a lot of communities have already done. They bring in immigrants who help revitalize their communities that are in this sort of terrible downward spiral. And this is even in Japan, they're starting to do this. So immigration can be used as a tool in our favor. Right now, it's being used by the autocracies to attack us. And so I think that, the three things that, just to reiterate, one, let's get rid of let's put an end to the drug war. Let's get the flow of money let's destroy the economics. Number two, let's do a worldwide effort against corruption, and I propose some ideas for that. And number three, let's make immigration work for us, for people who are desperate to escape whatever situation they're in because of a civil war or because of drug cartel violence. Well, let's find out a way. Let's figure out a way. Let's think out of the box and find ways to actually make that contribute to our prosperity instead of being a weapon as it is now by the autocracies.
We've only got a few minutes left, so I want to talk about the ideas on nuclear proliferation that you have.
Yeah, the thing is there was an article in the New York Times recently how the U.S. is going to invest like 1.7 trillion to revitalize our nuclear arms, to modernize them, and Russia, China, and others are investing so much money into this, and it's something that it's I don't know. It just seems kind of, I don't want to say a waste of money, but it just seems kind of a waste of money. And the thing is that I think we could one of the ways that we could do this is let's come up with a system where I propose that like Russia, the U.S., we all get say 30 ICBMs apiece, and we put those all together on one island. Each island has a Russian section, a U.S. section, or this island would have. And so we would have all of our nuclear weapons, we would have far fewer nuclear weapons, just maybe 30 max. And they would all be in one location. So it would be impossible for them to be snuck off this island. And number two, you couldn't attack the island without destroying your own nuclear arms. And who is going to say that 30 nuclear weapons, 30 ICBMs is not enough of a deterrence? I mean, who's going to say that, oh, well, gosh, we could lose Los Angeles, New York, Washington, D.C., Chicago, Houston, 30 nuclear weapons is enough of a deterrence by anybody's, there's no way anybody's going to say, oh, well, gosh, we could lose all of these major cities and everything's going to be okay. And so the idea is to reduce it greatly, put it all in one place, the 8 or 9 nuclear powers, all sharing it on all one island. The maintenance would be far cheaper. It would be completely transparent. There's no way anybody could sneak attack anybody else. Even if somebody tried to sneak attack somebody else, destroy their nuclear weapons, they would destroy their own nuclear weapons in the process. And it would help, keep nuclear weapons from the nightmare scenario where some terrorist group gets a nuclear warhead, which is an ever greater possibility when you have tens of thousands of these arms. So the idea is, what I propose is that let's negotiate a treaty where maybe the U.S. gets 30, Russia gets 30. Or maybe North Korea, because that's a smaller one, would get 10, but still enough of a deterrence by any and the benefits of that would be, it would be safer, and it would also cost trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars less. It would reduce the possibility of an accidental nuclear war being started. And so this is the proposal that I've made on there. Let's think of ways to really reduce the possibility of an accidental nuclear war. Let's think of ways of helping to prevent a nuclear arm from getting in the wrong hands of somebody. And let's think of a way to radically reduce the amount of money that we're spending on this. I mean, I'd rather have $1.7 trillion being dedicated to our infrastructure or to our educational, infrastructure, rather than nuclear weapons. And I'm sure even Putin, greedy Putin, could probably appreciate the savings.
Well, one would hope so, at least. Evan, I want to thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to join the show and to talk about your ideas. Your blog is solutionsparty.org.
Yes.
And for those that are watching, it's right here on the screen, and we'll go ahead and we'll put that in the description as well. I'd like to give you any last words that you'd like to talk about.
Well, just, I'm basically looking for anybody who would like to join this effort. This is, these ideas. Let's get them out there, and let's make the ideas even better. It's not like these are the final word. I believe that let's get the exchange of ideas going. This is what democracy is all about: an exchange of ideas and constant improvement. And so I would love to have anybody else, come and join me on this effort. And let's stay positive. Let's think highly of our fellow American, regardless of their point of view. Let's cherish their point of view, and let's give them the benefit of the doubt and believe that everybody's got their heart, or the vast majority of the people have their hearts in the right place. And let's be positive. Let's talk about some ideas to make things better. And I just want to thank you, Sean. I can't tell you how much I've enjoyed this, and I hope we can continue to have conversations from this point on.
Absolutely. Again, thank you so much for joining us. I've had a great time. And I want to make a special announcement. We're going to have a special program this Sunday at 5:30. So tune in for that. And for everyone else, we will see you next Tuesday. Evan, thank you so much.
Thank you, Sean. It was a pleasure. I enjoyed it greatly. Thank you.
I have too.
Thanks.